I'm curious about, President Biden saying that those 2,000-pound bombs were used to kill civilians, and now the United States won't allow those bombs to be used or doesn't want those bombs to be used. But we know that all of Gaza is so intensely populated. So is there a differentiating factor in terms of how many civilian lives you'll allow to be killed with those bombs?
We have said that far too many people have died, that Israel needs to do more to minimize civilian harm, that the actions they have taken have not yielded sufficient results. All of those things we believe to be true, still believe to be true. That is different than a legal question of whether there have been violations of international humanitarian law. That's a different question. It goes to not just questions of civilian life, loss of civilian life, but whether international humanitarian law was violated in the loss of that life.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. In his comments, President has also said in the other part of the sentence, and in other ways in which they go after population centers. Going after someone or something does imply to me intent. And also the bombs in question are 2,000-pound bombs, and their impact when dropped in a population center are known. We know that Gaza is already it's very densely populated, and there are people squeezed in a small place. So how can any country claim there was no intent if you're dropping a 2,000 bomb on a population center?
Okay. Matt?
Really? 4 days in a row?
4 days in a row. I'm sorry. As I was
all.
walking out here, I was remembering our exchange about this yesterday and thinking,
nothing
I'm
is
going to get it.
in the world. It's all very quiet. Everything is fine. Calm.
Again, my lack of opening remarks does not indicate lack of anything to say.
Right. Okay. So can you explain to us what the impact, what the practical impact, at least for the State Department, is of the President's comments last night about arms shipments to arms transfers to Israel, and whether or not this plays into the NSM report that I guess is not coming today and maybe tomorrow?
So let me speak first with the NSM report. It doesn't have any practical impact on the NSM report. The NSM report is a backwards-looking report where we're looking at a number of things over the past, for conduct from last year and then up to when we send the report. It doesn't have any impact either on the content of the report or the timing of that report, which won't be today, but again, I expect in the very near future. It's just a matter of days that we'll be able to get that report up to the Hill. And then with respect to the larger question, so what the President made clear is that we have concerns about a potential military operation in Rafah. I don't think that's any secret. We've been making those concerns known publicly, and we have made those concerns quite clear to the government of Israel. And as the President noted, there are certain types of military assistance that we will not make available to Israel for use in a campaign in Rafah.
Okay, but I was under the impression that you guys didn't speak to hypotheticals.
So we have made quite clear for some time our concerns about a Rafah operation, something the Israel government has signaled is likely to be coming. And so, yes, we have been engaged with them on that.
Well, I get it, but isn't there a big if in here?
Certainly, that would be our hope. We don't want to see an operation go forward, and
no, I know.
We're making that clear.
But every time you're asked any question that's got the word if in it, or it's not something that has already happened, you refuse to answer. And now,
I wouldn't say every time. Wouldn't say every
pretty
time.
much.
Look, I just to be, I should be serious about this.
I'm not trying to make light of it. I just, you guys have, or the President has made a policy prescription, apparently, based on something that hasn't happened yet.
He has,
right?
Because we have been in close conversation with the government of Israel about this fact. There is a there's a very real difference, obviously, between coming to the briefing room and getting a question about something that might happen and something that we're engaged with a foreign government that they say they intend to do. And we treat those differently for quite obvious reasons.
Okay, so you're saying you won't tell us the full truth, but you'll
I'm saying
Anyway,
it's different when
the
a
point
reporter
is-
raises a hypothetical question
All right.
versus the government saying, this is what we intend to do,
But-
this is what our policy is going to be, and we have to make determinations about our
Is
policy.
it your understanding that the president has decided that what Israel has done in Rafah so far crosses the red line?
We have not yet seen an indication of a major military operation. So that's something that we're watching closely, and the president made that clear in his comments.
And yet he already decided to halt or to suspend these shipments.
We
based
have
on something that hasn't happened.
paused one shipment
Okay.
and are reviewing others in the context of a potential operation. But again, we hope that there is no operation. That, I think, would be the best outcome for everyone involved.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
To follow up,
Yeah.
just what is your definition exactly of a major operation in Rafah? I mean, you have tanks there, you have bombings going on every day. They took control of the Rafah crossing. What is your definition of a major operation?
So I'm not going to get into too much detail about that from here, but I would differentiate it from the types of operations that we have already seen from the beginning when it comes to Rafah. We have seen Israel execute strikes against Rafah. We have seen them, when I mean strikes, I mean airstrikes. Going back to last October, it's something that they have engaged in. The operation that we saw to take control of the Rafah crossing appeared to be a limited operation. It's not a major invasion of a civilian area, neighborhoods packed with people, thousands and thousands of people. So when we talk about a major operation, we're talking about a campaign targeting these civilian areas that are densely packed with civilians, in many cases civilians who are refugees from their homes, sometimes refugees twice over, who have moved once, twice, 3 times, and are now taking refuge in a place that is literally their last resort where there's nowhere else for them to go.
Matt, on the NSM report, can we get the latest ETA on when state will submit that?
In the coming days.
So-
It's the very near future. I don't have a date to affix on the calendar for you, but it will be very soon, I can assure you
So
that.
is there a chance it might slip into early next week?
I am not going to give any timetable at all other than to say the coming days, which is what I said yesterday. I can assure you it will not be long.
Okay, a couple of other things. In your answer to Matt, you said the report is going to be retrospective.
Correct.
Right.
It's looking at past conduct.
Right. And he asked you, I think if I got it right, whether there is going to be any practical impact on president's comments on the report.
Correct.
So, but the president's comments last night also covered the past. He talked about, let me find the quote here. He talked about civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs. So can you explain to us how his comments have no practical impact on the report?
What I was taking Matt's question to mean is Matt's question was related to the decision that the president announced last night, or that the president made public, to not provide Israel certain military weapons for a Rafah campaign. That is a forward-looking decision. We have paused shipments now. The report is a backwards-looking thing. Now, the report will obviously look at allegations of violations of international humanitarian law. That's a different thing than what the president. I mean, I'm speaking just to a determination going forward versus a backwards-looking report.
Okay, well, let me ask it in the way that I sort of was thinking about asking. It is a report that is assessing whether or not Israel's assurances are credible on 2 things, and one of them is using U.S.-supplied weapons in accordance with international humanitarian law. And the President of the United States yesterday said civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs, in reference to the 2,000-pound bombs. So can you explain again, like, how his comments, maybe that's not a determination as a result of a legal process, but those are comments from President of the United States. How does that not have any impact on the findings of the report?
So I think you have to look at 2 separate things. One is the tragic loss of civilian life throughout this conflict, which we have spoken to many times. The president's spoken to, the secretary has spoken to, other members of the administration have spoken to. And we have said that far too many people have died, that Israel needs to do more to minimize civilian harm, that the actions they have taken have not yielded sufficient results. All of those things we believe to be true, still believe to be true. That is different than a legal question of whether there have been violations of international humanitarian law. That's a different question. It goes to not just questions of civilian life, or I'm sorry, loss of civilian life, but whether international humanitarian law was violated in the loss of that life. And those questions are something that we continue to look at and have not reached any determinations.
And how do you determine whether international humanitarian law is violated with those killings? Is your criteria intent?
So there are all sorts of things when you look at I'm obviously not a lawyer, but when you look at the standards that have been applied in every conflict around the world, it goes to questions of intent, it goes to questions of proportionality. There are other things you have to look at when making those determinations.
My final thing on this. How do you think, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. In his comments, President has also said in the other part of the sentence, and in other ways in which they go after population centers. Going after someone or something does imply to me intent. And also the bombs in question are 2,000-pound bombs, and their impact when dropped in a population center are known. We know that Gaza is already it's very densely populated, and there are people squeezed in a small place. So how can any country claim there was no intent if you're dropping a 2,000 bomb on a population center?
So this goes back to the very difficult problem that Israel has faced from the beginning, is that you have Hamas embedded in these population centers. So yes, the Israeli military very clearly is operating within population centers because that's where Hamas was. That's where their military targets have been. And I will say, as we have looked at this conflict from the beginning, obviously we react to facts on the ground. So at the outset of this conflict, you saw Hamas that was well entrenched in civilian areas and was able to launch not just the attacks of October 7th, but dozens and dozens of rocket attacks for a while. They were launching them every day for the first month of this conflict. And Israel, in the first stages of the conflict, was able to degrade Hamas's ability to the fact that those attacks, while they still happen, are sporadic. They're not as frequent. And the Hamas battalions in northern Gaza and central Gaza have largely been defeated and have been dismantled, though clearly there is still a Hamas population that exists in all of those areas. What we have also seen over the course of this conflict is Israel take measures to try and reduce civilian harm, and we have seen the numbers come down. Just if you look at the death toll from back in October, November, as Israel implemented additional measures, the civilian death toll did go down, but we haven't seen it come down far enough. And so when you take all those facts and you overlay them with a campaign in Rafah, where you have a denser civilian population than Israel would have faced anywhere else, just because of the people that have fled there. And you look at their track record at previous points in the operation, it leads us to believe that there would be incredible civilian toll, and it's something that we can't support.
Okay, truly final one, and I apologize to my colleagues. Can you tell us where we are on the hostage talks? And there are Israeli officials, I believe perhaps Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying a deal on the hostage talks collapsed because of President's decision and because President signaled this decision. What would you say to that?
So first of all, I'm not going to respond to anonymous officials. Is that on the record quote from someone? I'm not going to respond to anonymous officials, but I would just say that is not at all our assessment of the hostage talks. We actually think that a Rafah operation would weaken Israel's position, both in these talks and writ large. We've talked about this before, that a major military operation in Rafah would further weaken Israel's standing in the world, would further create distance from its partners in the region, who actually share Israel's goal of seeing Hamas defeated and want to see Hamas replaced with a different governance structure in Gaza. And then also, if you look at Hamas's track record, they have never cared about Palestinian civilian lives. If they did, they wouldn't have launched these attacks in the first place, which they knew would produce a response. They wouldn't hide behind civilians, and they would have agreed to a ceasefire long ago. So I just don't think that argument holds any water. With respect to the talks itself, so we continue to engage with the Israeli government on the amendments to the proposal that Hamas submitted earlier this week. We continue to work to try to finalize the text, try to get an agreement. And I will just say that any effort like this is incredibly difficult. This one has certainly been incredibly difficult, but we will continue to stay engaged to try to get a deal because we believe it's in the interests of all relevant parties.
So it wasn't an anonymous official, it was the Prime Minister of Israel that she was.
So I hadn't seen it on the record. That's why I had seen anonymous quotes earlier. I think my comments stand.
Okay,
I did give a substantive response in any regard, so
Well, I
can apply to that.
Okay, substantive, I don't know by whose definition. But anyway, when you
Ouch,
say that.
Matt. I thought it was pretty substantive.
The death toll, when you said before, prior, the death toll continued or has fallen since October. It's come down, but not yet enough. Whose death toll are you talking about here? Whose figures are you accepting?
So we are looking at the figures that are released by the Ministry of Health, which we do
By
have.
Gaza, but
yeah,
by
which you know that
which
we
is
have.
run by Hamas.
Which you know that
And
we. Let me just finish. We know that we don't have any way of verifying those figures on our own.
Well, then how do you
but
know
they are the only figures that are available. And look, the UN relies on them. We look at them.
Okay.
We do think there are probably issues with the numbers, but they do capture a large death toll and a large civilian death toll.
But you're fairly certain that at least in terms of the trend, they're accurate.
It's just that I can't say accurate with any degree of certainty. Like I can't give you a what percentage
Well, then what-
accuracy. But no, hold on. But if you
With
look
any
at
degree of
I
certainty?
can't say if
Like it
they're
could
I can't
be
say if they're off.
0%?
No, if they're off by 10%, by 5, by 50. I can't say something like that.
I mean,
but
they might be off by 50%. Who knows?
But stipulate whatever they're off by. They have come down, and so they have come down over time. The daily number has come down over time when you look at where they were last October and November to where they are today.
All right, last thing, really briefly, just on this whole hypothetical thing, because when Humaira started her question, it was about my question to you, and it is a hypothetical because you have the president making a determination on something that hasn't happened yet, right?
He is making United States policy based on conversations with the government of Israel, where they tell us what they plan to do.
Let me put it in a very flip way. Like, should I be bringing an umbrella home with me when I leave work today?
I have not looked at the forecast. I can't quite answer that.
Right. So that's a hypothetical. So you don't know, right?
I don't have control over the forecast. The government of Israel. Hold on. The government of Israel has control of what it's going to do, and so when they tell us that they intend to do something, we make our policy in reaction to that.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification on that very front, because Admiral Kilbury said this morning that the Israelis have been saying their Rafah operation is limited, precise, and of a short duration. That's something that you're going to monitor. So have they told you that they are going to undertake a big operation in Rafah, and that's the reason for this policy?
They have made quite clear they intend to conduct an operation. The operation that they have conducted so far has been limited. They have talked, I think, quite openly about conducting a major military operation in Rafah. We are opposed to that, but we'll see what happens. We have made quite clear we don't want to see it happen. We continue, and I should say, we do continue to engage with them about other options that they can pursue. We have presented a full range of other policy choices that they can make that we think would achieve the goal of dismantling Hamas and choking off the Hamas battalions that remain in Rafah without further endangering civilians there and without causing this mass population displacement with no place for them to go. And so they may end up taking that option, but right now we will wait and see what happens.
Have you had any indication in conversations since this policy shift was announced that they are considering a different tactic?
I'm not going to talk about our private conversations with them, but you can look at their public remarks and draw conclusions from that.
Okay. The original reason, going back to April 4th, that both the president and the secretary have said that the U.S. would shift its policy was because Israel needed to boost the amount of humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. That picture looks about as bleak as it has ever been, with Rafah being closed, Kerem Shalom being open, but nothing going in. So is this suspension meant to also address the humanitarian effect, or are there other potential consequences that the administration is considering on the humanitarian front?
So I don't want to get into previewing any other potential policy options. I will say, first of all, you're right. We have been very clear that the level of humanitarian assistance needed to come up and it needed to stay up, and it is not at the level it needs to be this week. That said, Kerem Shalom is open today, and some trucks have moved through Kerem Shalom. So we are have had a bit of an increase from where we were yesterday. I don't have the number, but just before I came out here, told that some trucks move through. Some trucks also move through areas. So there are trucks that have gotten in. Not enough. Clearly not enough. Not at the level that they should be. And so that's why we'll continue to push, continue to work with humanitarian partners to try and get them back up, as well as to get Rafah open. That will continue to be a priority for us.
But are there any additional, because that was April 4th, so that was, a month ago, over a month ago. So are there any additional consequences at this stage being considered specifically for the humanitarian?
I am not going to preview specific steps, but we have always made clear when it comes to humanitarian assistance and the need to have it increased and sustained, that we will make our policy determinations based on the facts on the ground. That's the case. Okay,
and one follow-up on Humayra's question about the hostage talks. How can you say with such confidence that the policy shift the U.S. has just announced didn't meaningfully affect the trajectory of those talks, either by undercutting the Israelis at the negotiating table or emboldening Hamas at the negotiating table?
So it is just not our assessment based on actually being in the middle of these talks and seeing how it's happening and what Hamas is actually demanding and what their incentive structure actually is. That's just not how we see it. But also, again, to my point, the idea that we just have never seen Hamas as having any interest in civilians and civilian life in Rafah. So the idea that a Rafah invasion that would kill civilians is something that they lose sleep over, just isn't backed up by the facts, isn't backed up by their track record the past 7 months when they have put civilians in harm's way time and time again.
If a full-scale Rafah operation goes forward, is it safe to assume that it eliminates the prospects of a ceasefire and hostage deal altogether?
We will continue to work for a ceasefire that brings the hostages home, no matter what it takes. That will continue to be the goal that we will work for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just one question on the NSM delay. Is there any reason that you can provide to us for the delay?
That we just continue to work to finalize it.
Okay. I'm curious about, President Biden saying that those 2,000-pound bombs were used to kill civilians, and now the United States won't allow those bombs to be used or doesn't want those bombs to be used. But we know that all of Gaza is so intensely populated. So is there a differentiating factor in terms of how many civilian lives you'll allow to be killed with those bombs?
No. First of all, we have always made clear that we don't want to see any civilian loss of life. And we have consistently pressed the Israeli government to take additional steps to minimize the loss of civilian life. But the assessments that we make are informed by what happens on the ground. And we are in a very different place today than we were last October. That's what I made clear a minute ago in response to, I think it was to Humayra's question, where you have seen Hamas significantly degraded. You have seen their ability to launch the kind of attacks that they did on October 7th. Significantly degraded, if not completely eliminated. They couldn't launch an attack of that scale today. Their weapons production factories underground have been eliminated. Most of their battalion leadership in the north and in central Gaza has been eliminated. So Israel has achieved a great number of its military objectives. So that's one thing that is different now versus then. But the other thing that's different now versus then is that we have watched the experience of those few months. And even when Israel has taken additional steps to minimize civilian harm, we've still seen results that were where far too many civilians were dying. So we talked about this on some of the trips where there was one in November where the secretary went and pressed Israel to take additional civilian harm measures. They did. They announced some of those. We talked about them publicly. And we still saw an unacceptable loss of civilian life. So when you look at all of those factors, both where the the battle versus Hamas stands today, and the track record over the last few months, it leads us to believe that the loss of civilian life in Rafah, where you have a situation unlike anywhere else, both because of the concentration of people and because there's nowhere left to go, because all these people have come down to Rafah and there's nowhere for them to go now, it leads us to believe that the results would be disastrous from a civilian harm perspective.
Okay. And then NSC's John Kirby said earlier today that Biden doesn't want certain categories of American weapons used in particular operation in a particular place. Can you just clarify for us, is this a review of the future shipments of U.S. weaponry based on what those weapons are? Or is it just based on the possibility of delaying or halting all U.S. weapons to Israel?
So I'm not going to get ahead of what the president said last night. We are reviewing, we have paused one shipment, we are reviewing others. But as the president made clear, we will always be committed to Israel's defense. He talked about continuing to provide them defensive weapons. We will always be committed to Israel's security. We will always be committed to helping Israel defend itself against Hamas, Hezbollah, the threat from Iran, the threat from other terrorist groups and malign actors. But when we look at a potential operation in Rafah, the president made clear that we are not going to provide them certain weapons that they could use in such an operation.
And then just last question, Kirby also said that Biden was as forthright in his conversations with Netanyahu about, the possibility to pause weapons shipments, as he was in the conversation publicly on CNN yesterday. Was the secretary also as crystal clear in his private conversations as President Biden was publicly yesterday?
Yes. We have been quite clear with the government of Israel for some time that we are opposed to a major Rafah operation. And the secretary in his conversations has made that quite clear and made quite clear the potential implications as the president did.
He's made clear which shipments might be
I'm not going
paused.
to get into details, but you can be fully assured that the government of Israel understood our policy.
Sorry, did he make that warning in last week's trip?
I'm not going to get into details. As I said, there is no doubt that they understood what our policy was should they launch a Rafah operation, or what our policy would be, I should say.
Thank you, Matt. Before I ask about Rafah, I want to bring your attention to 2 days from today, May 11, will mark the second anniversary since an Israeli sniper killed our colleague Shireen Abu Akleh, a Palestinian-American journalist. And I want to ask you, are you satisfied that everything that could have been done to bring those responsible, to hold them accountable, has been done? And do you consider that case to be closed?
That death continues to be a tragedy, one that was investigated by the Israeli government, one that we investigated, and I don't have anything further to add to what we said before. In the past.
So the case is closed.
I just don't have anything further to say on what we said many times from this podium.
Now, on Rafah, Matt, I know there is, or what you guys keep saying, that there is no major operation, but there are little tiny operations. They just killed a family of 8, last night, in an area that is to the west, not to the south or to the east, in Tel Sultan. I mean, I don't want to name all their names, but 4 were children, Ahmed Abdurrahman, 10 years old, Lanana, 12 years old, Muhammad Ramzi Lulu, 5 years old, Jenna Muhammad Lulu, 1 year old. I mean, so these things go on day in and day out.
And every one of those deaths is an absolute tragedy, Saeed.
Right. But, I mean, it is obvious that the Israelis are not heeding the president's call, your call, to, sort of hold back and so on. One thought, or what we heard, is that once they raise the Israeli flag on the Rafah crossing, that maybe things will not, go south from there, but they are, right?
I don't know where you heard that, Saeed. Every death is a tragedy. We have made clear we want to see them take additional steps to reduce civilian harm, but that doesn't change the fact that, just as a factual matter, we haven't seen a full-scale major military operation. Again, we're talking about like the kind of operation you saw in Khan Yunis, like the kind of operation you saw in Gaza City. Just as a factual matter, that has not yet begun.
Right. Yeah, by the way, you said that, Hamas is hiding among the civilian population. It was not Hamas that drove the people south. It was actually the Israelis. They told them to go and, hunker in Rafah. And now,
So Saeed, you're getting to my exact point, which is it was appropriate to evacuate people when there was some place for them to go. Right? When there was Rafah, which was, if not completely safe, safer than Gaza City, safer than Khan Yunis, and some place for them to go. That's not true anymore. There are not there's not sufficient infrastructure in Khan Yunis or elsewhere in Gaza for the people that move to Rafah to go somewhere else. That is why we are so opposed to a military operation there.
Yeah, which takes me to my next question. I mean, if the Israelis, as you said, have already achieved their goals, and if there is no place for these people to go anywhere, why can't the United States say, no invasion of Rafah? This operation must end now, full stop, because obviously it has reached, a wall or a dead end or whatever it is.
I think we have said no major invasion of site.
No.
Hold on, you're just listening to the initial part of this briefing. But that said,
No,
hold on. There are still Hamas fighters there. We have never said that Israel shouldn't be able to do anything to take on the Hamas battalions that are there. There are things that we support. We have made clear in private conversations with them alternative paths for taking out and degrading and choking off those Hamas battalions. That continues to be our position, and it continues to be our position that Hamas could end all of this right now if those battalions would lay down their arms, if Sinwar would come out of the tunnels, and if they would stop fighting. That's another way that you could end all of this.